Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein is scheduled to meet with the president tomorrow. The question of whether he will keep his job is buzzing throughout Washington.
But so many other questions loom as well, like what will happen to Special Counsel Bob Mueller's Russia probe if Rosenstein is shown the door? And will President Trump declassify all those FISA documents he was talking about related to that probe? Joining us now to discuss those things and more, Democratic Congressman Steve Cohen of Tennessee, who serves on the House Judiciary Committee. Great to see you, Congressman.
Good to be here and talk about and more.
We'll get to the and more. On Rosenstein, if he resigns or if he is fired, is there a difference in those two actions in your mind in terms of the implications?
Well, not just in my mind, in law there is, and it makes a distinction on whether or not President Trump can name somebody to replace him, or it has to go through Senate confirmation. And I think that if he's fired, President Trump has more difficulty doing that, and if he resigns, then President Trump can use laws that are currently available to name an interim replacement and not have to necessarily go through a Senate confirmation.
But the president clearly does still have the right to fire Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein if he chooses to. You would agree with that?
Yes, he does.
Yes. Okay. Because I know that people say they're going to protect Mueller and protect Rosenstein. They mean that rhetorically? They mean that...
You could protect Mueller. I mean, we could pass a law, and I have... I introduced the law, Conyers had it. I took it up when John left Congress, and then Walter Jones and I are sponsors. This was bipartisan, and now there's one that's a Democratic bill, because Republicans haven't joined it, but maybe 120 co-sponsors at least, that would say you couldn't fire him except for cause. And there is some provision in the special counsel law that Mueller cannot be fired except for cause. So it has to be job related. So he can fire him, but he has to have a certain standard.
And how much does it matter who is overseeing at the Justice Department the special counsel's probe? I mean, whether it's Rosenstein or Noel Francisco, does it make a big difference in your mind?
It makes a big difference. Whether Mueller has the opportunity to go in the places that he thinks it's necessary, what his charge is, and I guess that's subject to interpretation, but under Rosenstein, it's believed that it can go into different areas concerning finances of Trump and other Trump associates, and they're doing that in the Southern District of New York, and then somebody else like Francisco may think that that's beyond the charge and not appropriate because it should deal strictly with Russia. Now, it may deal with Russia with his finances because it could be that that's what influenced him to get involved with Russia or some of his connections, but it may be more tangential than direct, and it just depends on how he interprets it. He could put his thumb on Mueller.
Congressman, do you believe Rosenstein's denial with regard to the New York Times story about saying that he would wear a wire and discussions of the 25th Amendment, or do you think that he's in a position where he's not telling the truth? Should he come before Congress?
Whether he should or shouldn't, I mean, you know, I suspect he's telling the truth, that it was facetious. I think he said it, and I think he kind of says he said it, but he said it sarcastically, and from what I've read, he kind of said, what do you want me to do? What do I have to do? Wear a wire to prove his feelings? And you know, I think he created a difficult situation with him and the president, and I think the president will fire him. It's just a question of whether or not he should, you know, rent his apartment.
But should he appear before Congress and talk about this incident? I mean, undermining the commander-in-chief that way would seem to be something that Congress would be interested in.
Well, I imagine we will have him before Congress, and he'll have his day with Mr. Jordan and Mr. Gates. They'll have.
Rosenstein,
that's going to happen. Okay.
I suspect it will.
Rosenstein is not the first administration official to talk about or reportedly talk about the 25th Amendment. Does it say more about those administration officials, or does it say more about who this president is, that those things seem to be routinely discussed within his administration among his own people that he appointed?
I think it clearly talks about the administration. There's no question President Trump was not born to be president, nor did he prepare himself to be president, nor is he prepared to be president. He is a reality television show acting right now out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Well, I guess no one is really born to be president, right? That would seem to be somewhat anti-American.
George Washington.
Right, okay, maybe.
Theodore Roosevelt was pretty much born to be president.
Okay. Well, can I ask you about the state of the investigation into Kavanaugh and the congressional hearings, the Senate hearings rather, about what's going on there? Do you think that this has just turned into a circus? Do you believe that this is really about getting justice for these women or for Judge Kavanaugh and his family?
I think it's probably a microcosm of what's going on in politics and in America today. It's an issue about truth, and it's an issue about the Me Too movement and how you treat women and what your attitude is toward women. And unfortunately, I think the Senate, because of the Republican leadership, is failing both tests. The truth is not the most important factor. I think the problem is not as much of the actions that the judge might have engaged in the past, but the fact that he's lied about them. If he has lied about them, the question is the truth. Did he lie or did he not lie? And he says none of this stuff occurred, and he was Mr. Rogers when he grew up, and he just put on a sweater and went around and said, "Oh, boys and girls, what can we do today?" And that was, he was a big-time beer drinker, and he had a problem with alcohol.
Democrats are all of a sudden very puritanical, by
Well,
the way, on
only
these
by
notions
his
of beer
standard
drinking
that
and
you
partying.
set
No,
out.
I just want to note, all of a sudden, if you were drinking underage, Democrats are on the case.
No, we haven't. Merrick Garland was not a person who I think would have had these problems if he had the opportunity to be interviewed for the position that he was nominated for. And I don't think that
Justice Gorsuch didn't have these problems.
Gorsuch didn't, and Ginsburg doesn't, and Kagan didn't, and I don't think nobody did. The Chief Justice didn't. To be a Supreme Court justice requires a certain amount of probity and rectitude that is exceptional and is not something that's just for a frat boy. Now you can grow out of that possibly, but you don't lie.
I mean, you're talking
you
about
gotta be honest
hold
about
on
it.
a second, Congressman. You're talking about a sitting D.C. Circuit Court judge who was voted in by all the senators that were looking at him, and has written 300 opinions and went to Yale Law School. He's considered at the top of his legal field. I mean, to call him a frat boy, sir, with all due respect, that's a bit much.
He was a frat boy.
He was when he was 20 years old, yes.
Right, and that has something to do with where you are. I think that we had a judge who was nominated some years ago who smoked marijuana at Harvard and didn't become a Supreme Court justice because he smoked marijuana. Now, it was a different time, just like people are saying today is a different time with Me Too, but the times are the times. And what's worse, trying to take advantage of a woman without her consent and putting your hand over her mouth to quiet her down, if it's true, and that's the allegation that the Senate should try to find the truth about, whether he's lying about that or not, or smoking marijuana. Smoking marijuana did not allow a man who did not put his hand over a woman's mouth to stop the world from knowing that possibly she was being raped.
That's silly, and I think everybody agreed it's silly, but nonetheless.
But
What's silly?
That the marijuana would stop somebody
Right,
from
exactly.
becoming a Supreme Court justice. I
Right.
think that's
Okay,
silly.
good.
Let me ask you this. I mean, in my view, and we've just learned more this morning, Dr. Ford has 4 signed statements corroborating that, she told people after the fact that this had happened. This isn't just something that came to her now, and she took a polygraph test, so she has some things backing her up. But to me, the kind of question, the central question that you were alluding to here, is when it's a jump ball, when no one really knows what happened in the room, and you've got him saying one thing and her saying something different, who do you believe?
Well,
how do we weigh that question?
It's difficult, and I think that's why they didn't call the author, David or Mark Judge, whatever his name is. David Judge is maybe the Yankees.
Mark Judge.
Yeah, Mark, non-Yankee judge. And they didn't call him into testimony, which they should have. If they wanted to get the truth, you bring in the third party in the room. And they'd probably go, I don't remember, but at least he'd say that, and maybe he'd say something different. Maybe under oath he'd say something different. You could call in the FBI agent, former FBI agent who gave Dr. Ford the polygraph test, which is a condition for employment in many places in the federal government, and ask him about the test and the basis of it and how she
Yes, what are the questions that she was asked? Which is
that's
never
right.
been released.
You could ask that, and you could ask her therapist about who she talked to allegedly in 2012 and what she'd said then, and that would go to verify her story. But they just seem not to want that, and so they're not going to. They're really not getting at the truth. They're doing the bare minimum they can to try to satisfy the female vote in November to make some females think that the Republicans do care about sexual assault.
Congressman, thank you. Always
You're
great
welcome.
to
Thanks
have
for
you.
coming.
Great to have your
You're
thoughts.
welcome.